tools for healing and responding to a psychic break. Now, this is on a psychedelic channel because psychedelics are amplifiers. They amplify the uncharted terrain of the psyche. And a break happens when the ego consciousness is dependent for its safety and survival on a certain familiar terrain that it has been able to orchestrate certainty around. So you may be familiar with the statement that we all crave certainty and familiarity, and then we all crave variety. And that a path of growth and a healthy and enjoyable life consists of this dance between establishing safety, establishing a baseline that is certain, and then jumping. It's like the trampoline is solid, now we want to jump. If the trampoline is wobbling this way and flipping this way, we don't want to jump. We cling on for dear life. We don't start really playing, growing, and jumping until we establish a level of certainty with which we feel stable and safe. Psychedelics, depending on what we have constructed our baseline of certainty with, have the potential of destabilizing that baseline. Like, let's take a rationalist, atheist, scientific, capitalist, materialist that has answered the chaos, the pain, the wounds, made sense of everything they've experienced in childhood with this bottom line rule that everyone does everything for themselves and it all makes sense scientifically and everything can be explained, blah, 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 blah. Oh my goodness, now I can relax. Now I can feel safe. And, LSD, DMT, marijuana, it's just something that can be physically and scientifically explained. It's a chemical. Nothing wrong with feeling good. There's, you can come at it in a variety of ways, but let's say that someone who has established certainty around a baseline of nothing exists except for materialism, and they take a psychedelic and they have a divine experience of selfless, connected, continuous love. They have an experience of a being that is 100 to 1,000,000 times more conscious and present than fits neatly in their baseline of certainty. Well, now the trampoline is turning upside down. It's wobbling, it's this and that, because the rational extension of that thought is, if I got this wrong, what else am I wrong about? If my core belief that God didn't exist is wrong, maybe I'm wrong, about that girlfriend who said she loved me, but I didn't believe her. What if I'm wrong about that? What if I'm wrong that, my whole life is, supposed to be about making money and having sex and this and that and the other. And what if I'm wrong about that? What if I'm wrong about everything? What if I had it all wrong? Now, this what if completely shatters the illusion of certainty that is so meticulously constructed to protect an individual. from the trauma, the dread, the panic, the uncertainty, the helplessness they may have experienced in childhood. And this is important to acknowledge. It's probably one of the biggest risks of going into psychedelics without adequate preparation. Now, in this situation, I said it's an amplifier. And what I'm talking about is the conditions within which a break, a fissure, can appear within the self. So we have our ego self, and let's say the whole baseline of security and stability that the ego has built. And this is not arbitrary. This has nothing to do with you personally. This has to do with being born in a rationalist, materialist, lineal logic, scientific, democratic, economic, reductionist paradigm. I mean, these are the gods of our world. And many of the things that go on in this world, which seem totally crazy, which seem totally barbaric, have a strange sort of logic along those lines. This person destabilized a whole economy because they were short selling the stock. I guess it kind of makes sense if your whole life is about making money. And so if you get into these weird, arcane, linear, narrow corridor channels of thought that is completely dissociated with the horror, with the empathy of why would I do that to a whole economy, just to get rich? I mean, what's the money for? And so our culture, we create our culture, we participate in it in varying degrees, and then that culture creates and trains us in these ways. And what better way to find certainty than in congruence with the core tenets that everyone around us seems to be believing in and acting consistent with, and so, okay, I'll make that my stability. Now, a psychedelic can shatter that in an instant, because the full psychic terrain that we have is not bound to space and time. It's not even bound to physicality. And so suddenly we're aware of who we were before we were born. Now, when the ego has survived, particularly survived deep trauma, primarily because of its ability to feel safe in the certainty of normally accepted cultural tenets, then when those shatter, the ego feels it cannot survive. And how a partition in self occurs is when the ego says, I can't let go of this stable trampoline, this baseline of certainty, this belief in rational materialism. I can't let go of that because nothing's there to protect me from the trauma, the terror, the overwhelm, the uncertainty that I have not received the support to deal with within a culture that has its head up its ass so thoroughly that it doesn't even acknowledge the importance of emotions, let alone caring enough about these deep states to train each of us as human beings in the art of relationship with terror, with shame, with dread. In a world of science, it's amazing how unscientific we are in the terrain of psychology and emotions. I mean, these scientists that are lauded for their great works fall apart just as much as the next man or woman when their partner cheats on them, when they have when they lose their dog, when their car goes off a cliff, and their work falls to pieces. They can't cope. They can't continue their denial, their exclusionary focus on, the next iPad app or something, in a paradigm where their own emotions are overwhelming them, which is living proof that emotions are more important than ideas in certain situations. So if emotions have the ability to kill you, to kill others, to stop all scientific work, to paralyze, to traumatize, to lead people to fail in every human endeavor, if emotions have that power, which they do. I mean, you can't look at the underlying reasons why most of what happens without the narrative of emotion. I mean, just try flipping off a switch where you feel no shame, no fear, no joy, no meaning, no love, no hate, nothing. And you think you're going to get out of bed? Why? You think you're going to drive? Why? You think you're going to avoid that car? Why? There's no reason to be or do anything. You think you're going to bother eating? Why? You don't feel anything. And if you delete the anticipation, if you have the memory of feeling, I don't feel anything now, I'm completely numb, but I remember how terrified I felt when I got fired, and maybe the switch is going to go back on again. Sure, if you add the memory component, you can remember the emotion and motivate yourself now even when you're numb. We do that all the time, where a lot of us are numb. But if you take that off as well, there is no time and there's no emotion. Nobody does anything. No scientist does any science. No scientist cares about scientists. All of these rabid atheists, and all their fear, God doesn't exist and all that, they don't care. So they don't talk. I mean, nothing happens. That's how important emotions are. Now, we all know that on some level. So it's bizarre that we fastidiously avoid exploring and talking about the depth of emotions systematically. There's no class on emotions. There's no emotional gym. There's no emotional exercises at school, at university, at work, at home. They're just there. Now, this is a cultural imbalance. It's a cultural blind spot. There have been other cultures in our history of more than 10,000 cultures where the singing, the dancing, it was all about consciously invoking and partnering with specific emotional states. Imagination and emotional state was everything. And then the scientific paradigm inserted itself through weaponry and through technology by those cultures in their busy reveries of honoring everything in emotion, realizing that they could be mown down by machine guns by people who had no emotion. And that's how the scientific paradigm trumped the community, the tribal paradigm. How can it matter that we can create great states of joy and connection and presence if some sociopath, without feeling a thing, just pulls a finger because they felt like it and kill everyone? And now we cannot sustain the emotional state in a barbaric world with others that have no emotions. Emotions were overrated. We've got to learn what it would take to mow down those people so they can't mow us down. And so now we become sociopathic. So this is kind of the journey from tribal connectedness into the elevation of the left linear brain into consciousness. So many of us born in this culture are raised with the underlying safety strategy that this is the way it really is. This is what matters. And as long as I have the money, the power, the survival skills, that's all that matters. And when the psychedelic experience reveals some of the other vast terrain of the psyche, in some situations the ego cannot cope. I have to hold on that it's only material. I have to hold on that, might is good. I have to hold on that it's all about money, that everyone's selfish. I have to hold on to these baselines that kept me alive and made me feel safe and certain. But I can't stop my consciousness having taken this substance. My consciousness is on a roller coaster ride that I cannot stop. It's been mechanically opened up. That part of me exists. It's like a whole wing of the house that I wanted to pretend didn't exist. Those doors are now open, and my consciousness is walking those corridors, entering those rooms. Now, the break occurs if the ego self can't deal with the overwhelm of this new data, and the data is inconsistent with the paradigm creating certainty. And so the self has to divide. The ego says basically, you over there, I want nothing to do with you because you're ruining my certainty. You're ruining my narrative. My story doesn't make any sense, and I worked so hard to create a story that made sense. You can look at the scientists and their flailing, wailing despair when new data, when new physics, when new research. Look at what's happening, with Graham Hancock and his archaeological workshops and experiments in tension with existing scientific theory. Everyone is so happy when the narrative made sense. We all agreed, and don't you dare introduce new data that ruins the narrative. Scientists are fundamentally emotional, and so they will throw out facts as flippantly and unscientifically as the next person if their sacred scientific theories are shaken and messed with without a clear and compelling alternative. This is why we stay backward for so long. I mean, Louis Pasteur, when he discovered germs were killing people in surgery, all the doctors scoffed because they couldn't see germs, because their whole model was that nothing they can't see exists. That's what made them feel comfortable. That made them feel safe. So here's Louis Pasteur talking about, no, there's these invisible things. That's what's killing your patients. They drummed him out of town and carried on butchering and killing patients for years rather than upset their narrative. So you can get how, what you just learned there is that people are willing to murder and die defending their certainty, even if it's wrong. Why? Because that certainty is protecting them from the volatility of deep, repressed emotions, that because they don't know how to deal with them, they're pretending they're not even there. Now, psychedelics are going to take you into these palaces and these dungeons where you see the captured personas in their torture cells, butchered, maimed, attacked, hated by the culture because you're upsetting the narrative. I mean, look at the barbaric state we're in. Someone takes LSD, you miserable fucker. They break down your door. They cart you off to prison. They hate you. You're a criminal. And they pay $80,000 a year to keep you there. That's how upset they are, with you ruining the cultural narrative. And that's what you are. You're a narrative ruiner. This substance is a narrative ruiner. It ruins the narrative. Now, if the narrative is key to survival, you may split. Now, you're then left in this terrifying situation where what you thought was real wasn't real. I thought I was feeling this, but now I meet a part of myself that's feeling this. Who am I? Which one is it? It's both. There is a part of you feeling this. There's another part of you that's echoing other people's feeling of this, and it's not even your feeling, but that part of you knows it, empathizes with the feeling. If you don't know how empathy works, and if you don't know how mirror neurons work, when you see this part of you feeling the feelings of other people, you may be confused and think that's you. Remember, you have no emotional training. I mean, if you consider knowing that an apple falls to be a full scientific education, you can say, okay, I have some emotional training. You've done a few workshops, you've been to Esalen, whatever. But compared to the deep journeys into paradox, into dimensionality, into the full emotional depths, into the ecologies of complete emotional bodies throughout time and different archetypal energies and how they all dance with one another and reinforce and recreate one another, and the imbalances that create pain and the balances that create power and integration. Relative to all this knowledge, you and I know absolutely nothing. So we need help. And here's the next whammy. When your parents have lied to you, when your culture has lied to you, when your friends have betrayed you, because we're in a world where just about every single human being that you've encountered would have done just about anything, including murder their dog, throw their daughter into a freezing, whirlpool, shoot themselves in the head, just about anything to avoid certain traumatic, intense emotional states that exist within the human paradigm. A good way to look at it is that within the last 60 million years, within the journey from reptile to human being, within the catastrophic ages, the times of slavery, the perpetration of violence, the recipient of violence, the chauvinism, the rape, the barbaric lies, the conquests, the terror of entities that are projected. The Old Testament God, a nightmare of chauvinistic, barbaric, sociopathic delusion. A father, I want you to split your son in half with this sword. If you don't, I'm going to kill you. Okay? Okay, you've proved your loyalty. You were willing to cut your son in half. Fine, now you can go do a difficult job for me. I mean, are we listening? Are we listening to what we're projecting? What we're deifying? This is where we've come from. Imagine if you're that boy. Imagine if you're that father. Imagine if you're that God. It doesn't matter if you're that God who challenges everyone to do exactly what you're told. I mean, we know that part in ourselves. You have got to do what I tell you to do, or I'm going to hate you, I'm going to abandon you, I'm going to punish you, I'm going to leave you, I'm not going to love you. We know that part in ourselves. And we know the part in ourselves that knows we are going to be hated, punished, revenged if we don't do some crazy thing that someone who says they love us want us to do. And we know what it's like to be the sacrificial victim. We know what it's like to be that helpless, innocent boy waiting on the stone table. Is Dad going to cut us in half to avoid the terrors, the rages, and the revenge of a sociopathic God? Or will we be spared today? We know each of those three roles, and each of them are filled with terror, filled with horror, filled with grief, filled with shame, filled with confusion. This is part of our heritage. This is part of our human psyche. And psychedelics open that up. You know, we like to pretend, oh, no, we're civilized, we're scientific. Bullshit. Psychedelics open that up. And they also open us up to the divine beauty, the divine grace, the forgiveness, the compassion that sees all of that with kindness, with caring, with gentleness, and that welcomes us into another paradigm. It's confusing. It's big. We know nothing. But particularly those of us who have been abused, who have been psychologically and physically tortured in one way or another, it's very frightening to go out into the unknown. Because when we've experienced that at the hands of our fellow human beings, there's a tendency to be conscious that when we go into the unknown, we could feel that again. There could be other conscious beings with more power, with more hatred, that do this and do that to us. And we may encounter that. And our brains are focused on survival. They're focused on the worst case scenario. Sometimes to such a degree that it's so overwhelming to acknowledge what could happen that we just disconnect from it at all, and we pretend that there's no danger at all, which is an even more dangerous state. Because when you're absolutely terrified and can be re-traumatized by the slightest betrayal, and you go into a terrain in which you could experience betrayal from a state where it just can't happen, then it's even more upsetting when it does. You know, and so this is part of the terrain and we need to learn honor. We need to learn honor. Honor for the vast intensities of these psychological terrains. Honor for those people who have the courage to witness, to feel, to own some of our cultural heritage, some of our cultural wound, and begin healing it. We need to honor these people as sacred, as the way showers, those people pioneering the way into the Western territories, the frontiers that we will all ultimately inhabit, dangerous frontiers. Those original pioneers out into new land masses encountered many unknowns, foods that were poisonous, famines, diseases, new peoples, new identities. It's a vulnerable state to go into the unknown. And everyone on a psychedelic journey, everyone who is pushed and propelled by substance or circumstance into the depths of deep emotion, takes that journey out into the Western frontiers. They take that journey They pioneer a new path. They show the way. They map the territory into new pitfalls that we don't know exist, into traps, into dangers, and into light, and into beauty, and into resources, into new possibilities that we do not know exist. 99% of everything that we are, 99% of our future, 99% of everything we need to become the human beings and the spiritual beings we want to be is out there in the unknown. It's out there in the unknown. We need to go into that territory and support those going into that territory with great respect. We show great respect for our species, for ourselves, for one another, for the other, for our future. When we care for ourselves and others going into this terrain. What I want to do now is turn my attention to, you've gone out there and you've broken and you're shattered and you're confused and you're overwhelmed and you're dissociated. Part of you's looking in this taboo arena of the psyche, and part of you's looking in this familiar terrain that's always been there. And they don't add up. If this is true in a reductionist, rationalist paradigm, how can this be true? Well, one possibility is that all truth is not rational. Another possibility, paradox exists. Another possibility, there's room for more than one truth. Another possibility, the very meaning we have ascribed to truth as some objective thing is a faulty definition of truth. That rather a truth is like a pair of glasses. That when I believe the world is selfish and I put on these glasses, I can see certain things that I couldn't see without that truth. And when I put on the truth that the world is loving, I can see certain things that I could not see when I wore the glasses the world was selfish. There are many glasses to wear. And they're not all the same. And each pair of glasses reveals a different truth, reveals another face of the multifaceted, multi-dimensional faces of this set of the many realities. And there's room for many truths. So maybe the big mistake is it's not a question of is it true or isn't it true, but that I can see this truth with these glasses, I can see that truth with these glasses, I can see this truth with these glasses, I can see this with this eye, I can see this with this eye, I can see this with my nose, I can see this with my eyes, I can see this with my mouth, I can see this with my hands, I can see this with my imagination, I can see this with my light and this with my shadow. Maybe there's a big enough definition of truth to make room for it all. And maybe the terrain we are exposed to through the boundary dissolving mechanism of a psychoactive compound or a profoundly dissociating traumatic event is gifting us and challenging us with data sets that don't fit neatly into an either-or paradigm, but do fit abundantly into an and-or paradigm. And/or, 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 endlessly. But what do you do? I would like to talk about what has helped me. Number one, create the safest space that you can for your physical body. Now, what do I mean? I mean, do and take the practical steps that will allow your body to sleep when it needs to sleep without being molested, without being shocked, without being woken when you need to rest, without being bothered by the fears and needs of other people. Create, if possible, an oasis in which you can sleep when you need to sleep. Create a container in which you can talk and compassionately be heard when you need to talk and be compassionately heard. So let's look at these things practically. A little cabin out in the middle of nowhere where you don't have to be barraged, how are you, by all these people that don't want to know, and all that insanity. How are you? No, I don't want to hear. It's bizarre. Just give yourself a place apart where the terror, unconscious as it often is, the need to be helpful, all the needs of other people, can just be the needs of other people and not burden you further. Number one, a cabin, an island, a culture that is warm and non-invasive. I love going to Thailand, where nobody knows you, so you're not pressed. Create a physical cocoon, a window. Now, optimally, you do this before you take your substance, before you invite in a cataclysmic experience. You create a container to hold it, held by who you are. 10 by 10 room of complete silence, access to nature, ability to come and go and meet your basic needs without being subject to the barrage of other people's anxiety and needs to prove they didn't do anything wrong, or need to prove this, and need to create an oasis. The ability to speak without pressure, without backlash, to start integrating what's there. If you're very lucky, you will have a human being. Very lucky. 1% of 1% has, at times, a grace and a skill to be there for you in this place, without agenda, without personal need, in service and in love for you. Now that percentage needs very much to grow, and to the extent that it's this kind of gray line curve where almost no one can and will offer that with full clarity and beauty and grace in the way that you need it. What if they can do 50%? Well, maybe it's kind of a wash. Maybe they do 50% of harm, judging you being anxious every time you steer them through their mirror neurons into that psychological terrain in which they're not ready to deal with themselves. They push pressure back at you to deny your own reality so that they can continue denying yours. But they hold your hands. They massage your feet. They help you feel cared about. Is it worth it? It's up to you. Maybe they hurt you here and help you here. Human beings are a mixed bag. Why shouldn't they be? They haven't received any more training than you or I, and they may have received a lot less. So human beings are a mixed bag. Dogs, loving, present animals and dogs, are much healthier. They are not going to barrage you with psychic demands, with psychic guilts, with psychic terrors, etc., etc. If you can, spend time with natural systems, horses, dogs, cats, birds. They're all less dissociative and less insane and less diseased and less imbalanced than people are, unless people have trained them very strongly to be traumatized. A beaten and abused dog is not going to be a safe container for you, but a well cared for dog probably going to be more safe than people, and so that's part of your container. This piece of being able to speak whenever you need to speak and say whatever you need to say for as long as you need to say it, when you need to say it, is a very important piece of the integrative, reintegrating structure and process. How do you do it? How do you do it when, the average person is going to hurt you more than they help you and all that? See me in 2 weeks and pay me $300 and I'll just sit there saying, and get anxious that you took drugs. The typical Western therapeutic protocol. I mean, is that better or worse? Is the therapist focused on you, or are they busy thinking, gee, am I enabling? Should I call the police? Whatever. Are they absorbed with themselves and their own fears? Hard to say. Hard to say. Therapists, in my experience, are a mixed bag. They have their own stuff, often suppressed and denied. They don't know what they don't know. They haven't gone on your journey. They haven't seen what you've seen. And this is the isolation and the loneliness of going on a journey that no one understands, that no one feels safe enough to join you in. This is a challenge. I'll just tell you what's worked for me. If you're fortunate enough to find someone who loves you, who's gentle, who loves innocence in themselves and in you, and who connects through the heart more than the head, whose focus is, I want to be here with you, I want to love you, I want to be close, and none of that stuff matters. You are blessed in this world. You are one of the lucky ones. Spend time with them. As much time as you possibly can. Let them become a baseline that you can depend on. Oh, gosh. Some sanity in all of this nightmare and craziness. Let them be a baseline. Support them, if possible, to be a baseline. I started a business for someone so that they wouldn't be in conflict, because when they were a golf caddy, they had to go out on that schedule, which didn't always coincide with my schedule, and when I really needed someone to just hold my hand and be there with me. So I started another business and saw that they made more money in which they were their own boss and had complete freedom with their time. But this was after I had already seen that if they could possibly, they would always put me first. That was just who they were. That's the kind of person they were. They cared about emotion. Emotions came first, money came later. That's a wonderful person to have. That's a wonderful person to be for someone. If you're lucky, work together in that terrain. But what if you're not? What's your container? How are you going to talk without judgment, with space, as much as you need to talk? Well, there's a typing persona, if you know how to type. There are certain things that come out when you type. If you've got an active listener or a co-counseling buddy, I found it very hard to do trades in the typical listening trade because I'm trying to download. I do not need other people's stuff. I need to keep saying stuff. So doing another kind of a trade, when all this is done, I'll help you move your house. I'll do this and this and this. I don't want to hear any of your stuff, but can you listen to me? A co-counseling buddy. I'm mentioning these terms so that you can look them up. An active listening, a compassionate communication. These are protocols where people in these communities learn a practice of holding space. It's not perfect. It's not whenever you want, but it is a possibility. Is it better or worse than nothing? Hard to say. There are possibilities. Cuddle Party, cuddleparty.com. Again, a possibility of a container that is calming to the adrenals, where you're just holding someone for a while. On the other hand, it's not totally safe, because if you desperately need to hold someone for 2 hours and you're at a cuddle party where someone feels a little bit claustrophobic after 5 minutes and they say, I've changed my mind, and go to the next person, you may feel abandoned. The cuddle party is not designed with the trauma survivor in mind. There's not really an optimal place in our culture, and one of the ways that we can measure the degree of self-loathing, ignorance, and hostility within a culture is how well it acknowledges, welcomes, anticipates, prepares for, and serves its trauma survivor. We are not in a terribly enlightened culture. Well, and so what works? Journals, writing. But look at what I'm doing right now. Last night, I had traumatic dreams. I had a traumatic psychedelic experience in which I desperately needed to hold and be with a certain part of myself, and my girlfriend, sensing that I wasn't there for her in the way that I normally would, because I'm there for a part of myself, and the psychedelic is pivoting my attention towards a part of me that needs love. Sensing that I'm not there for her, immediately she triples her neediness. Come on, I need you to be how I'm always am for me. I can't. I've got to hold this part of me. So she ups, and I feel rage. I feel helpless. I feel inadequate. I can't love this part of me, and I can't be there for her. So I've had violence, rage, helplessness, despair, hurt, overwhelm, terror. And I woke up. I remember dreams in which I've been violent. And understanding it, I watched a movie about Jimi Hendrix last night, and saw him beating one of his girlfriends, and it's like and then I had a dream of me doing that, and I'm terrified. I don't want to be that person with my girlfriend. How do I avoid that? I don't know. It's like I'm trying to figure it all out, using my Western brain, and I have some safety in that I have only been violent 4 times in my entire life, and with only 3 out of 70 lovers, and all of those in self-defense. So, I can mentally calm myself a little bit and say, well, you've had, you've spent time with 70 lovers. You've been violent for less than 5 seconds in only 3 of them, with 3 of those people, and in all cases it was self-defense, and it would, they threw you some real curveballs that made it very difficult to get out of the situation without using force. So you've got that part of you. I get that you don't want to express it. It's not terribly probable, but I also get that you're terrified. You don't want to be that person. And you're not getting support. I mean, none of those 3 women cared that you didn't want to be violent. They were in their own trip and doing their own highly traumatizing and re-triggering things and refusing to respect boundaries. So, this is part of the terror and the horror of being in a culture with untrained emotional beings. I mean, would you want to be out on the highway with people driving 65 miles an hour with no driver's license, no training, and just, randomly whacking into people? Of course not. We actually are intelligent to train in technical matters, just not in emotional matters. Chauvinism. But I'm talking to this camera, and I raced and grabbed my camera. It's one of my containers. It's one of my resources. I made what I call a PTSD diary. It's part of, just witnessing. See, because when I'm looking at a camera, I'm seeing me. I'm seeing another human being that understands everything I'm going through, that cares, that's showing up for me. I see the emotions on his face. I see someone taking the time. And this is reassuring, because no one else is. No one else is taking the time to hold space for this. But this man is. So you've got the ability, you can get a little tripod for $13. You can get a little attachment for your iPhone or smartphone. You can stick a memory card that can hold, 200 hours. A good 30-minute video is about 3.4 gigabytes if you have high resolution. So, you have a 100 gigabyte micro SD card. You can make 30 videos, and you may need to. That's only 15 hours. Have at it. Have a backup battery. Have a good power source. Have the tripod. Talk to the man, to the woman in front of you. Talk, empathize, be everything you are, and learn. Oh, that's not so unlovable. I get that. I understand why you're feeling that way. I understand why you're thinking that way. Or I don't either. You're saying that, I don't know what to do. You don't know what to do, I don't know what to do. But at least you're here with me. At least someone is there. There's a sense of other, the one in the camera. And they're not going to interrupt you. They're not going to pressure you. They're not going to judge you any more than you judge yourself, maybe less. And you can externalize the weight. You can get all this jumbled, seemingly tension and paradoxical stuff out there, and you can start giving it some space to piece back together again. I've done more than $130,000 of therapeutic-oriented healing and therapy and relationship counseling because I found it helpful overall. Overall, it's been helpful, and I don't believe there's anything more important to spend our money on than well-being, and so it's not like I'm going to go to a therapist if I'm absolutely desperate. I'm going to go to a therapist if it's fun. If they're a good listener, if I can learn something more than if I didn't go. Well, a good therapist, that is the case most of the time, so let's do it proactively and otherwise. Now, there's a couple of kind of logistical and decisions that you have around this information. The first thing is to create a container in which you feel okay being you 100% on camera, talking about everything that's there. The next thing is, I suggest, give yourself permission to be completely unprofessional. My nose itches. I scratch my nose. I'm too tired to get out of bed. I stick the camera so maybe it can't even see me. Fuck it. Just give. It can hear you. Talk. Say things. Look in the face. Try different things. Experiment. Someone comes in and interrupts you. Fuck it. Let them be part of the video. Don't put pressure on yourself in this state of intense overwhelm and tension and that needs integrating for other people. Make the camera help you. Your first loyalty is to your own healing. That being said, I'm making this video for the Psychedelic Safety channel that I created because I wanted all of my horrors and traumas around psychedelics and abuse and stuff to be helpful for other people. I knew what it was like to be completely isolated and alone in this state and have every single person around me resent that I was in this state because they were too busy, or thought they were, to show up for it. And they didn't want to show up for this state in themselves or in me, etc., etc. And I thought, if someone had prepared for me and made a video series about psychedelic safety, I'd feel cared about. I wouldn't feel so alone. And that matters. Feelings matter. You matter. That matters. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it for them. This makes me feel good. It makes me feel like, the entire human race is not fucked up in this area. That at least one human being is doing something about it. And if that's me, so much the better. And so there's actually, my hope in humanity goes up when I behave in a way that I think is healthy, which gives me confidence and hope that other people are probably doing the same thing somewhere around, even though they're not in my circle. It's giving me hope. And so that actually brings in a sense of purpose to this. How could I help someone? How could I take my nightmare of last night, my pain, my kind of dissociative waking up and feeling panicky, and actually be there for someone else? So that's giving me a focus, a meaning. Everything else stops existing, including all that panic, while I'm showing up in service. So that could work for you. If that's the case, do it. You don't have to make a final decision. You can make a YouTube channel and share this stuff. A little tip around that, I disable comments, or I make them moderated. And because I've seen so many abusive comments on YouTube with just by, they're dissociative. They show no awareness of the impact they have on the producer. And that's not what you need when you need help. So I actually give them to my assistant. He uploads them. He moderates the comment. And anything that's there to help someone, that would help another survivor, that would add insight, that would show kindness to anyone in this terrain, goes up there. Any nonsense or abusive stuff, he gets rid of. He doesn't accept in the moderated comments. And I think that's respectful to this terrain. You can do it yourself. You can get some help. So that's another piece of creating this outlet. Having a journal to write in. Most phones have an application, like my Android phone comes with a audio dictate feature that will record me speaking for up to 10 hours in a single stretch, so I can just press start. This is actually a tool that I have used to record and honor psychedelic experiences also. I just press record, and most journeys are over within 10 hours, and anything that I've said is captured, and I have notes as well, and my intentions, and I'll do notes, and I'll review the recording and the notes. And maybe I'll make videos. I've made videos in altered states so that I can meet that person from my normal persona and start learning from him. Okay, you see that. I don't see it, but you see it. How could I open my eyes more and see that also? What's the difference between you and me? What part of you do I want to learn more about? You're my teacher. And so this is a lot of powerful uses for the phone. Recording, videoing during the trip, videoing after the trip, holding space for yourself in I call them PTSD and psychedelic diaries, and then being of service and sharing some of the narrative, knowing that you are not alone, that you are entering terrain we all face, we all have inside of ourselves. You're having the courage to go there. And by speaking about it, you're making it a little bit less safe, a little bit more safe, perhaps, for other people to go into that terrain, a little bit less taboo to talk about. And you can decide objectively after the process if it'd likely be, helpful for someone. Create the situation in which you can speak and be heard without pressure. So once you've got your physical safety stabilized, once you've got a container in some means or other that allows you to speak and listen to yourself speaking without judgment and backlash and all of that, then the next step becomes funneling love into the terrains that you find hard to love, that don't have enough love to heal and to integrate. Funnel love into that terrain. Now, what do I mean, and how do you go about it? We've already looked at the iffy aspect of human beings in our culture, and it's certainly true that for the most part, people cannot love you in ways they don't accept, love, and understand in themselves. And understanding is a big part of that, because if they don't understand the part in themselves that corresponds to the part that you're asking them to understand, you're inviting them into the unknown, which is many people will kill, murder, commit suicide, etc., then go into the horrifying unknown. So if you've got a terrain of pain and horror of some kind, and it's unknown to the other person, expect to be sold out, basically. They'll lie to you, that doesn't exist, you're crazy, stop doing that, don't be negative. They don't want to acknowledge the reality of that emotional state. And they certainly don't want to acknowledge that it could exist in them too. It does. It does. We are faces of the same being as a humanity. Through mirror neurons, through the many adaptations within our environment, there is solid evidence that makes sense to me that at some level we are connected, and at some level what I'm exploring in the human terrain is a part of you, and vice versa. As such, it is intelligent to be kind and supportive to people who are entering the most delicate and fragile terrain on the planet. Because those are the parts of who we are as a species that need it the most, and that have the potential of bringing extraordinary gifts back from that place. How are we going to get the love? I mentioned briefly, a kind and nurturing dog. That's certainly within our paradigm a great resource, a kind and nurturing dog. It's questionable around a child. Certainly if you have a child, bond, it's not appropriate to use a child as a funneling device for horror and grief. There's many things that are not appropriate in this culture that happen because there's no preparation for anything else. If you've got a 6-year-old child, a 5-year-old child, a 2-year-old child, if you disappear, particularly in the many people that are single parents, the child is going to go through trauma, the trauma of abandonment. On the other hand, if you bond with them, you may learn through their innocence and through serving them and loving them what it's like to be a human being. And you may see the beauty of human goodness, and they may be your biggest ally, and it may be better than abandoning them. If they have a very safe party who can understand what's going on, mommy, daddy's going through a really difficult emotional time, they love you, and because they love you, they don't want to scare you with that. And you've got a really safe place over here. If you can take that weight off of you and just go into all of your stuff without the pressure of constantly worrying how this is going to be affecting them. It is affecting them, positively and negatively. It is affecting them. That's great, and you have to weigh and weave through, unfortunately, largely on your own. There's not really anyone you can trust to make a better decision than you, unless you know that someone loves them more than you love them and understands you and them more than you understand yourself and them. If you're fortunate enough to have that rare person, include them in the choice, ask for their opinion, and make the best decision for your child. Next comes this question again, how to let in love. A circle is actually one of the best things. If you can have 3 or more people hold space for you in ritual for 6 hours, just hold you, listen to you, care for you, love you, be in all that pain. I asked for that from the therapeutic body of the therapist who abused me sexually during my psychedelic therapy, for which I'd paid him. And they refused for legal and all that, and it was absolutely devastating. But that's where my impulse was. I want to be held. I want someone to really get what's going on. And I want people here that are here because of love, not fear, not legal issues, intelligent human beings that are honoring this step and this stage of the process. Maybe you're lucky. Dog, horse, 3 human beings in a circle. I want to kind of introduce you to, another facet of that, which is crystalline consciousness. Now, again, if you've been reduced to the rationalist, reductionist, chauvinistic, materialistic sociopathic paradigm of modern culture, oh, isn't that cute? You may patronize a crystal energy. So I want to give you a little bit of context. I had this context long before I had experienced visceral, emotional, energetic waves from and through crystals, more than 15 years ago, that I'd never experienced anywhere else. And so I was receptive to some of what I'm saying, which is just one of many versions of the truth. But what is true, our scientific narrative of the truth is that crystals are 40 to 200 million years old. They're very, in their silica compound, they're very close to computers. In other words, you can create piezoelectric effects with crystals. That on-off switch in quartz watches and stuff, basically when you give an electrical charge to a bit of quartz, it goes from off to on, and when you remove the charge, it goes from on to off, and so this vibrationary and this fluid electron formation of the quartz mineral makes it ideal for impact in the computer and technology arenas. And the invitation to consider is that it makes quartz crystals ideal receptacles for mental, emotional knowledge, holding, storing, flowing. And in the paradigm of a living Gaiac consciousness, which you may or may not encounter in your psychedelic journeys out into the other. In that paradigm, all things have a morphogenetic field. All things have a consciousness. And the consciousness within that paradigm of the quartz crystal is 40 to 200 million years old. It's not political. It doesn't lie. It doesn't have an agenda. And it can amplify certain states of energy that you may need to balance out and integrate your psychedelic experience in a way that human beings, statistically speaking, do not have the ability to do for you. And so working with crystals, letting consciousness come through the crystal, knowing that the crystal has its own essence and presence that will take a form that makes sense to you through the lens of your imagination. So you may see, a white goddess. You may see a fae. You may see a liquid light that seems like a tree spirit. You may see an animal. You may see consciousness coming through. What you're doing is you're pushing through the cave of darkness that is the physical body. Your consciousness is in a dark cave, and the only little pinpricks of light out of that cave are through the nose, the eyes, the ears, the mouth, and the skin. And you try and relate to all of reality through those little pinpricks that let information in. But there's light happening beyond the ability of the optic nerve to detect. There's waves of energy happening that the skin can't feel. In other words, 99.9% of all that is not registering in this body at all. And then 50% of what is registering in this body is not registering in this consciousness at all. Because our eyes see all this stuff, but based on our beliefs and our paradigms and all that, I just see my nose because I've called that a nose, and I'm looking like, is that too dark, and this and that and the other. But while I'm busy doing that, I don't even notice there's this little bit of hair. And while I'm busy doing that, I don't notice that this, shape here looks like the I Ching and this, tarot card. I don't notice any of that because it's not where my attention is. So I say, I'm not missing anything, but I'm missing everything. At least 50% of the sensory perception my body receives doesn't even register to my consciousness. And 99.99% of all reality isn't on a bandwidth and isn't modulated to show up consciously in this body. This finger can touch this body because this finger has electrons, and stuff functioning at a similar rate as this body. But what about a 2-mile radio wave pattern? You think my body's picking it up? No. My ears don't pick up a 2-mile radio pattern, my skin. What about a 2,000-mile radio pattern? And that's just on the radio frequencies. What about micro? We don't know anything. And there's consciousness in so much of what we don't know anything about. And we unfortunately assume that the consciousness out there is as cruel, limited, underinformed, etc., as the consciousness in here. We think we're all excited because we've got a phone and an iPad and all that. But that doesn't pick up love, does it? Crystals are one doorway. Go to a crystal shop, play around, create crystals in your imagination, visit a crystal cave, draw a crystal that exists somewhere buried under the earth, connect with it. The consciousness of crystal energy is not bound by time and space, but it can help your mind stay focused to have the physical object through a drawing, through a photograph. You can go online, look at beautiful photographs, find one that you really resonate with, and connect with the consciousness of that crystal, because your consciousness is not bound by time and space, and its consciousness is not bound by time and space. It is bound by your belief. If you say you're an idiot, you're not going to get much support there. But I would say that a third of the value of the love, of the healing that I have received has come through or from some of my many crystals. And I work with it intuitively. I have a lot of crystals, and so I get a sense of which ones want to help at this time, how to arrange them, when to hold them, what wants to come through each one. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. The crystal has never hurt me in this process. Plenty of human beings have. Crystal has no agenda of denying, this or that feeling or whatever. And a crystal has a profound sense of self-acceptance. You don't find crystals outraged about how they've been cut or why didn't you find us sooner. You just don't have that kind of dynamic that you have with human psychology within the ego paradigm. So crystals are a resource. Very, very slow, gentle massage is a resource. YouTube is a resource. And this is more important because it's available to almost all of us. But I listened to more than 200 hours of free Terence McKenna stuff. I didn't even know he existed, but I stumbled across him through Rupert Sheldrake and enjoyed what he had to say, amongst other things. And of course, with YouTube's algorithm, having watched a Rupert Sheldrake and Terence McKenna, it showed me more things by Rupert Sheldrake, but also more things with just Terence McKenna. I found them insightful. And so Terence McKenna YouTube videos, Martin Ball YouTube videos, Ramdas YouTube videos. You get into a loop of what other people have found useful, and you've got it there as a gift for free. You can lay flat on your back for a month, and anytime you want, press play, and you've got a companion with someone who's having the guts to talk about some of the many experiences that are flat out denied, ridiculed, and attacked in the ignorance of our mainstream culture. So you've got resources. You can't concentrate on a book? Fine. You want to read a book, Audible will let you download a book, download many books you want. I have about 100 books on my phone at any given point that are useful in this terrain. And I want to talk a little bit about this in depth. So first of all, when you start exploring the full dimensionality of psychedelic states, the definition of what is fiction and nonfiction changes. Is Harry Potter fiction, or is it a crude representation of some of the principles that are in play in some of the dimensions of consciousness, which one begins to explore? Now, you can answer this question however you want, and the answer can change. It can be, no, that doesn't mean anything. I disagree with that. That had nothing to do with what I saw here. And then next year, you go to another state within the psyche and you realize, oh, J.K. Rowling was tapping into this dimension in this time space, and sure, she overlaid lots of cultural elements and norms and dumbed it down. But there's something true here. A Patronus can be conjured that banishes this shame. And I can do it like this. Ooh, not bad. That's useful. The boundary between fiction and nonfiction becomes more questionable when the dimension and the understanding of the nature and size of reality is understood. And so in this sense, you fiddle around. What do I want to observe? I like to close my eyes a lot. I feel tired a lot, and I want to tune into a certain state. But sometimes listening to a book on tape, unabridged, fiction, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, whatever, or nonfiction, The Body Keeps the Score, one of the best books on trauma, PTSD, and the mental emotional landscape ever written. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. 30 hours. Download it on Audible. Audible is a free app. You can buy credits and then purchase a book for somewhere between $9.95 and $14 a credit, depending on how many you buy. I buy at least 40 books a year, and so I buy them all at around somewhere between $9.99 and $11. And this is like 30 hours of the top leading literature in this psychosomatic, traumatic terrain. And you want to learn a lot about trauma. You want to be on the cutting edge of trauma if you're dealing with integrating psychedelic stuff, because trauma is a dissociated state. And that's exactly what psychedelics is. You leave a part of your normal consciousness in your body, and then the question is as you come back, is that a healthy relationship? Is that a dissociative relationship? Do you go to war with yourself, or do you embrace yourself? And this will determine whether or not it is trauma. Trauma can happen at any time in a in a psychedelic, in an intense emotional terrain, which means that you want to be prepared. You want to be prepared. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Healing Trauma by Peter Levine. Fantasy books, magic, dragons. I mean, we're dealing in some of the deep archetypes, Greek mythology, etc. And as you go on journeys, look for correlations. Aha, this myth kind of talks about this truth, but it's been, made vulgar and this and that and the other in this way. Or, that cruelty. If you read Russian fairy tales, for example, you'll have the stories of the jealousy, the cruelty, the brutality of the stepmother, of the witch, of the older sisters, in tension with the innocent one. And you can start looking like dreams. Myths are very much like one version of interpreting dreams, where every character in the dream is you. And you can look at the malice and the hatred and the rage and the jealousy and I get that, that happy part of myself that just gets to have this wonderful life, and I'm left here in hell. I have to please these people, and I hate that part. I'm gonna kill them. And then you have this innocent part that is always leading the way to goodness, always leading the way to beauty, and we can look. Do we drown our innocence in alcohol? Do we attack it when it shows up? Do we take a stand for it? Are we being attacked by our boss when we are innocent? You look at these characters as if they're a dream, which it is. The stories are a dream that talk about all the faces of who we are. Mythology is a dream that talks about the different archetypal energies within us. Our life is a dream in which the archetypal energies are playing out in conversation with one another. The human entity, the species, is a dream in which all the many facets of humanity are in dance and tension with one another to varying degrees of sociopathic pain and volatility, love, healing, and integration. We can start looking. These are truths. You just stick on different glasses, you see different things. They're truths. How does it work? What can you learn? Close your eyes, listen, see what you learn. Okay, I see a little bit of that. I see a little bit of that. If it's getting too inward and you're not integrating it, you're losing it, that's when I get out my camera and make a video about those half-formed thoughts that I was beginning to think and then forget before I could finish the thought. I'm awake now. I'm awake. I'm bringing my awake dream closer to my asleep dream. I'm bringing my normal consciousness dream closer to my altered consciousness dreams. They're learning to understand one another. They're learning to be friends with one another. This is health. This is integrity. This is integration as opposed to dissociation and conflict. Bringing the different parts of self together. I'm building a bridge where I can coherently talk about this terrain to people in my life. There's not this sociopathic split between my work world and my psychedelic world, between my best friend and what I'm really thinking. I'm bringing this, and as you bring integration, of course, there'll be some people that reject the parts that you are bringing home. And then you have a question of loyalty. Do you hold on to them by rejecting that part of yourself? Or do you continue to bring all of you home? Invite your friend to accept them, but if they cannot, they can form a greater distance until they learn to accept that part of themselves. And then they will be able to embrace you again, this lifetime, another. You find those people, you find those arenas in the dream, in the waking dream, where more and more people can own and honor who you are, all of you, so that no part needs to be broken, denied, betrayed, suppressed, locked up in those dark rooms and left screaming for the cowardice and the convenience of those not able and willing to love those parts in themselves and therefore capable of betraying those parts in us. The comic arena, like I just watched a lot of the Green Arrow and the Flash. If you listen closely and look closely at these terrains, you can hear the conversations going on within the self at a megalithic level. It's at a grandiose archetypal level. but we can realize that those same tensions, all those interesting orchestrations. Malcolm Merlin, who's that Malcolm Merlin in the arrow, the green arrow, who's that Malcolm Merlin in me? Is he really good? Is he really bad? Is he, how does he piece himself together? Will people accept him? What happens? Because of course he enters his violent stage when he's in his greatest grief and he's attacked by another person in deep pain who kills his wife, and he can't cope with it in a culture that doesn't honor depth of emotion, so he can't come out. So he begins pulling people into his wound, replicating the state that he can't exit in other people, so that they feel the helplessness that he is unable to escape, so that it's all this different stuff, and it's right there in our mythology. The language of imagination is often truer than the language of accepted dogma that we call facts. Often. But it requires thought. It requires analysis. You've got to form a perspective. You've got to see what makes sense. Oh, I see this in this Russian fairy tale. I see this when I read Robert Bly. I see this when I talk with Margaret Mead. I see this when I read this book about this business person. And it all has a certain integrity. That one makes sense to me, and I know it in my own life. This other thing, I'm seeing them from this one source, and it seems at odds of everyone else, so I don't know how to piece it into the mix yet. But reality is always more complex, more complicated, more dimensional than we can possibly imagine. It's its beauty, it's its terror, it's its overwhelm. And it leads any intelligent person to know more and more of what they don't know, and to be humble in the face of something bigger than the ego can possibly understand. That humility is a very important step. So this is in the terrain of letting in love. Through crystals, through healers, through books, through presence and through resonance, it's very important to open up to the consciousness within self and without self that is much more loving than the ego self or any other human being is capable of being. Trauma cannot be healed alone. You must go out into the vast ecosphere of consciousness and connect viscerally with a being of which there are infinite, many beings, that loves you more than you love yourself, that loves you more than any other human being loves you, that accepts and embraces and feeds you the energy, the vibration, the templates that allow you to put these breaks back together again, to mend the rift, the tear, the wound, to help you transcend and become more, to not repair who you were, but become someone more, someone new, someone greater, someone that knows more, that owns more than the you were before the wound. And gives you the food, the compassion, the acceptance, the space, the non-verbal energy, the verbal, the energy that does not fit into our paradigms, but that helps you breathe, that helps you move, that helps you sleep, that helps you cope, that helps you turn the hate, the terror, the overwhelm, the shame, the grief, the self-loathing into something more, into hope. Not hope that human beings will figure it out, not hope but hope that there is consciousness that loves you in those places, that accepts you in those places. Hope, beauty, love, joy. And know that those realities are as real as this one. This one feels pretty real when you're in excruciating pain. And if you take your own life, you're free of it in a certain sense. But those realities are there, and they're beautiful, beautiful. It's important to know them, to connect with them, to let them in, to let them love you, to let their truth put the human experience in perspective. It's a speck of a speck of a speck of a speck of a speck in a very convoluted nether region of the intestinal flow of the consciousness body. It's a little bit of poison making its way through the intestinal gland in a very circuitous way, and it's slow. But right outside that organ is a light that encompasses everything and accepts you as you are without judgment. Now that's easy. The real challenge is, can you do the same? Can you learn from that acceptance, that light, to accept yourself, to accept others, to see the goodness that is trapped in the cave of their body, of their left brain, Western cauterized consciousness, in which they feel completely alien from everything and terrified of being alone, and they feel alone. Even the dogmatic religious folk, they're so dogmatic and attached to the forms, because they have no real direct experience of a being that accepts and loves all of them in all their faults, commandments or not. And that's so terrifying and destabilizing that they reject the reality of that truth, to hold on to the dogma that I won't be thrown in hell and burned forever if I do this and don't do this, and if I attack anyone who attacks this, and I'm going to hold it, and I'm going to hold it. You can see the fear, the terror, and be kind to them, and be kind. What kind of terror and delusion and traumatized insanity needs to come into people when they're young for them to need that certainty so desperately and to have nothing to turn to but this. And then you're the enemy, taking that certainty away. But you're also the liberator, reminding humanity that the picture is always bigger, more complex, more beautiful, more horrible, more intricate than we thought. It's always more. It's always more than we thought. So we have Audible. We have consciousness and the complete certainty that in the vastness of all that is, there are many beings that are waiting, available, have boundless energy to let their light into you. If you can find the way through the neural net to let that light in, that's the challenge. Once we've been reduced to this point that nothing we can't see is real, and these energies are functioning on levels that our physical eyes can't see, we've just cut off 99.9% of all that is because we can't see it. Now, we're not so stupid that we say that, germs don't exist anymore because we can see them in a microscope. But we're in a culture that doesn't validate the eyes of the heart. That is a sense. Our emotional body is as intricate and beautiful and complex as our mental body and our physical body. We just don't know that much about it because of the imbalanced bias within the culture to minimize emotions, maximize physical body stuff. We minimize relationships, maximize technology. We're an unbalanced culture, so why should we know? we're just monkeys 100,000 years out of the trees. The idea that we should know the way to do things is a little bit out there. But people who are a little bit out there are also some of the people who are most comfortable stating that they actually know and know better than anyone else. So, it's not surprising that we are taught by idiots that this is absolutely the way it is, which is, again, turn away from the species and include the possibility of consciousness that's been around longer, that's not stuck in some of the traps that we are, not to diminish or, in any way discount the dignity, the challenge, and the best intentions of humans in our human experience, but not to limit ourselves either. So that's largely the journey. And then making time to honor your psychological self, finding the balance, what's grounding and what's re-traumatizing. Is doing laundry, making ice cubes, taking out the garbage helpful? Or, if you've got the money, do you need to stay in a 5-star hotel and just, get some help, from a spa? I find that some of the healers in Thailand and the Philippines who give massage with a warm heart, who are emotionally present, who are comfortable existing outside of the box of Western culture, provide enormous grace for love, for safety, for deep meditative states while they're very, very slowly touching my body. Basically, give yourself permission to tweak your location, your activity, how you spend your money. And I remember I had one conflict when I had a huge break, because I'm really big on getting my jobs done on time. I'm a landscape designer. And 80% of my jobs are done early. I'm just really big on not letting people down. And I had 3 customers that I needed to attend to. And I wanted to commit suicide because I did not want to be alive and I couldn't function. And so I was looking into that. But the thought hit me. It's like, I'm uncomfortable asking these clients to support me in taking a month off. But I'm comfortable, exploring suicide. Well, when's the job going to get done if I'm dead? It's like there's not complete rationality here. If I'm dead, they're never going to get their job. If I take a month off and do good stuff in that month, then they get their job done. So I emailed all 3 clients. I said I had a family emergency, of which I certainly did. If they asked me what the emergency was, I said, someone in my family is having a really hard time and I want to make sure they don't commit suicide. Now, we're in a culture, in its craziness, that if I said I was having a really hard time, they would shame me and judge me and question and what's his motives and all that. If I say I'm helping a member of my family, of which I am, there's no question. Of course, you should help them, because we shouldn't waste time on ourselves. We should help them. that doesn't make any sense, but it is the way it is. So I phrased it in that way. A family member, of which I am one, I'm going to help them, of which I am one. And we're in a culture where suicide and grief and all that is so deep. If I said, I'm really concerned that I will commit suicide and I'm stressed out, this would freak the clients out. It's not my fault. This is the culture we're in. So when the truth freaks people out, you have evidence of a culture that is not adequately prepared to deal with reality. A culture that is not adequately prepared to deal with reality suffers more than a culture that is. We do suffer a lot more than we need to. Anyway, I took off for a month in Thailand, and it was wonderful. 2 or 3 hours of massage, swimming in warm black water. Koh Samui is a great destination. And I would learn cooking Indian food and hang out with this great Indian restaurant owner. And I learned to cook Indian food. I'd hang out there. I'd just take naps in the restaurant. Just heavenly. So lovely to be in a culture where no one is focused on productivity. And instead there's presence and in connection and acceptance for all emotional states. And in Thailand, I can just say absolutely everything, and nobody's upset by it. There's actually freedom to feel. And you don't have to feel badly because no one's upset, you're not upsetting anyone. So I felt suicidal, I felt this and that. Oh, well, let's give you a hug and all that. And they enjoy it, So hooray for intelligence. And so, a break is important. And any idiot who would rather you be dead than do something a month later deserves their own idiocy, frankly. You sometimes have to step back a little bit. And there are plenty of sociopathic people who will drive you to suicide and right to the brink if they think that'll help them get their manipulative agenda a little bit faster or whatever. And that's not who they really are. Those are, people in a scarcity mentality in a culture that just hasn't taught them emotional intelligence. So we have this difference in review. Create safety for your body. Create an outlet for everything you want to say and speak that is safe without backlash. Consider creating outside support through a healthy dog, animal, etc., nature, and or possibly a human being, possibly a circle of 3. Learn and digest and respect yourself to prepare the material. The body keeps the score. Healing trauma. Other books on shamanism and psychosomatic terrain. There's a good percentage of them on Audible. Give yourself those books. Give yourself those YouTube medicinal challenges if it feels good. If you're blessed enough to have someone who loves you in their innocence, adore them, protect them, cherish them, receive their love in abundance, and take the Western crap that says you've got to be doing your work, making money, learning things to the left brain is more important than life, existence, and healing. Fuck it. Drink up that love. Drink up that presence. Put your soul, your spirit, your dignity as a human being first. Accept all of the help. Know that you honor the intelligent one who gives you when you become more of who you are. Know that you're looking for a new identity that includes more of who you are than you knew before the break, before the trauma, before the rift. Understand that the mental tools you've been given to understand reality are very limited, and that your overwhelm and terror with more of reality is a function of inadequate training has nothing to do with you. Reality isn't fucked up. You are not fucked up. But the culture that trains you to perceive reality is fucked up. And you're going to have to rebel and be willing to do some thinking and practicing. And so just listen to a lot of different sources. See what makes sense. Have the courage to look at what you know on a deep level. Write it down. Speak it. Use your phone as a recording device. Consider being of service. Consider doing a documentary, a map of these terrains, and sharing and bringing what you've learned on your journey back to the whole. Every great explorer in history has served their country, their culture, their nation, their species by going off into the unknown, discovering pitfalls and mapping them, discovering death traps and mapping them, and discovering treasures and unknown beauties and mapping them and helping more people find their way there. This is our journey in a terrified, materialistic, paranoid, dogmatic culture. We are going off into the psychic unknown. And feared, hated, betrayed, run away from, and lied to, we are none the less serving the culture that does not yet have the eyes and tools of perception to honor what we are doing, which is a disgrace. It is a disgrace that we're taking bullets as we learn all that we don't know for the benefit of all. You know, we're criminalized, we're attacked. I mean, it's a joke. We're dealing with a very ape-like culture. But if we know that, what else should we expect from monkeys? You know, we don't have to take it personally. We can have a little bit of humor around it. Look at the many explorers who have gone before you, who have gone out into that terrain, been ridiculed, taken hits, and look at the way humanity has grown and continues to grow by following the path that is always mapped out by the minority. Let in vast amounts of love to nurture and sustain you on this journey that you cannot count on from your fellow human being. Let that be real. If you don't let it be real, if you're dependent on human beings in their current state to give you vast abundance of medicinal love that they don't even know how to give themselves, it's a pretty doomed journey. But if you've got a multiverse of love and consciousness, and if you consciously open up in your mind-altering states to let some of that in, to let some of that teach you, to guide you, to partner with them, and let them partner with you for your safety, for your well-being. Value your physical reality in this dream. Value this dream enough to take care of it. You know, I'm doing a $160,000 landscape job as I'm going through all of this. And I'm finding my balance. When do I have to really put my attention here? How much do I have to manage the crew? When can I just throw away and waste money to buy myself time? You know, if I don't supervise my crew, I can go on an important meditation. Maybe I waste $500 that day. You know, we all have a different reality. We all find the balance. And we have a paradox where the more we respect this reality, you know, the more we take care of business in the literal and figurative sense, the more space and luxury we have to take care of business in the unseen world. You know, I don't make money because I want to make money. I make money to buy myself the resources to do what I'm finding works and what I would like to see happen for you. And in a culture that honors paper money more than it honors the soul, you better have some. Um, so learn, it's a skill. And thankfully, this culture will help you right and left if you want to make money. Seriously. If you'll read 100 business books, if you'll look at what you're really good at, if you'll look at what the marketplace wants to pay you a lot of money for doing, and you give it, and you help people get what they want and think they want, they'll give you a lot of money. You can do what you want, what you think is good for humanity. That's part of the deal of being born at this place and time in history, in this culture, in this nation. Blessings. Thank you. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for growing. Thank you for bringing these dimensions to our attention. Thank you for the dignity that you give to us, to yourself, to me, by watching this video, by growing, by letting it touch you. Thank you. Blessings. Blessings. A blessing of good luck, good fortune on your journey.